Morning, everybody. It's Saturday morning here in the upper Midwest. It's been rather cold and chilly. I was minus 18 here yesterday in Minnesota, and I took the dog for a walk twice. And let's just say we made it around the block and back. And for me, that was about as much as I care to take at the age of 49 and a half. But for my husky, that was a rather disappointing jaunt. She wanted a whole lot more of that, and I feel bad for her in the summer. It gets pretty hot here in the summer in Minnesota, in the 90s consistently, up into 100 once in a while. Um, the hottest summers will get like your 400 or 500 degree days, but it's continental, high elevation, so we get some pretty extremes of weather and climate here in Minnesota. But it wasn't great dog walking weather for me, that's for sure. One thing I do want to clear up is some misconception I think people have about me and hi-fi. I'm not anti-hi-fi. I think there's a lot of great hi-fi systems, and there's a lot of beauty in a great sounding systems. Nothing. I'm not critiquing that. My friend Shigeru Suzuki in Japan has this wonderful hi-fi system. However, when he posts records, he doesn't sit there and talking about his system. People ask him about it, answer, but he posts the music and the records. The system just happens to be in the background, and it's not the focus of what he's sharing with people. But it's not people like Shigeru I ever have issue with. If you want to have a great system and even talk about it, that's fucking great. The problem is when you are judgmental and speak down to new collectors who buy lesser quality pressings in your mind. And I've seen that so much on the Facebook jazz groups where some newbie will post some new Bill Evans or whatever record that they bought was wax time or some bargain basement, digital to analog transfer. And they'll just pile on all these insults. And how could you? Don't you know? And it's like if the person that bought that record cared about hi-fi, then they would have bought a hi-fi compressing. They wanted to know the music and learn something about it. And they proudly post it to get ridiculed and talked down to. And I know these people drive away, people from jazz. I just can't stand that condescension. And sometimes I've even heard, some guy post a record and I'll have that same budget pressing and I'll watch 5 or 6 people just pile on the insults. Oh, you should never buy these guys, blah, blah, blah. Just let them enjoy the music. Talk about the music. Quit talking about in such a condescending kind of way. And that's what's always got me kind of defending those people, saying there's nothing wrong with having those pressings. They're out there, grab them. If you want to hear Bill Evans on vinyl, it's a great way to do it. Because most people aren't going to spend $1,200 for, Waltz with Debbie. And so I think it's that attitude that's gotten me kind of on the defensive against a lot of the audiophile people. And I don't ever mean to sound like I'm like anti-audiophile, because that's not the case. It's just it's rude. It's just uncalled for. So I feel like I defend people at times, and that's what I'm trying to come at. So I just wanted to clarify that a little bit. But today I want to talk to you about a great hidden forgotten player and a great hidden forgotten label. And first we're going to talk to you about the great tuba player, Ray Draper. And Ray Draper is an interesting case. I believe it was Jackie McLean who kind of brings him on the scene first. And so he starts making some recordings with Jackie McLean at Prestige in probably 58, 57 in that era somewhere. And he's on the two or three, I think, McLean records. And then they give him his own record here, 70, 96. So the 96 release in the 7000 series. For those of you who don't know, Prestige 12-inch series starts at 7000. And this is probably 1958, maybe 59, probably 58. And it's with Mal Waldron. Jackie McLean backs him up. Webster Young, the fantastic young trumpet player, is on this as well. As to who is the rest of the rhythm section, let's see. We got Spanky DeBrest on 2 days in a row. A Spanky DeBrest sighting. Although I think the other one might be Ray Draper as well. Ben Dixon and Webster Young. Spanky DeBrest, of course, played in that second great Jazz Messenger group. That's kind of the forgotten one. I did an episode about that last week. That forgotten year of the Messengers, 57, where they make like 10 records on 7 different labels, and yet they're all kind of obscure because they're not Blue Note, they're not Columbia, they don't have that cachet, and so they're all kind of slipped between the cracks. That also means that lineup kind of slipped through the cracks, in spite of Jackie McLean being part of that group for a while, and of course, Johnny Griffin was in that group as well. Him and McLean kind of trade chairs at times. But it was a great group all the same. And the recordings probably aren't on par with some of the Blue Note stuff that comes later. But for 56, 57, 58, that stuff's really modern and hard driving. And it's the Jazz Messengers. It's Blakey, you know. But that group's very forgotten. And Spanky DeBrass, for some reason, kind of slips into obscurity post Jazz Messengers, which is kind of a bizarre thing because most of the other members of the Jazz Messengers go on to pretty big things. But that group had a few guys that didn't really catch on. But you do see him on this, and I think Spanky DeBrass is also on this one, if I recall, which I listened to yesterday. Here it is. So that's back-to-back Spanky DeBrass sightings, 2 days in a row, being with the same group. And, of course, is Jackie McLean on this one as well? No, but John Coltrane's on this one, which was one of the big draws for me back in the day when I bought this. Was, of course, I'm a Coltrane completist at the time and have more Coltrane than I can shake a stick at, but it's all part of the jazz legacy and the jazz canon. But Ray Draper's a great tuba player. And tuba was an instrument you heard a lot in the 20s and 30s, and the New Orleans traditional style, and that boarding, marching, pa kind of waltz-driven. It brought the low end to a lot of early music. And with the bright horns of the New Orleans sound, the bass fiddle never really was part of that sound. And it was when we moved into the swing era where the bass fiddle starts becoming more prominent, but it's still kind of drowned out most of the time by swing horns and arrangements. And it takes some electrification, you know, with some pickups, and eventually, of course, the electric bass comes along and really changes the game for what the bass is about. But a lot of jazz recordings, you don't really hear the bass until they give him a bass break, and you're like, oh, there he is. You know, if you're lucky, maybe hear him on the intro helping to set the train tracks. And on some of the later recordings in the 50s and 60s, you'll hear the bass pretty good, but it's always kind of been a drowned out instrument. And tuba filled that gap early on. And if anything, tuba's actually a more propulsed tone. You could push that sound, but it takes some lung capacity. It's a big heavy horn to begin with, and then you got to blow through all that piping. It takes quite a strong embouchure and lung capacity, and so the tuba kind of falls into favor. The bass comes into play, and so by the time the 50s roll around, the tuba is a fairly obscure thing in the jazz circles. A guy by the name of Red Callender plays it on some stuff, but he also plays the upright bass. And a lot of the guys who dabbled in the tuba at this point were doing bass and tuba once in a while kind of things. But Ray Draper seems to be predominantly just a tuba player. And he works with McLean. McLean likes him. They decide they're going to give him a couple records here at Prestige. The second one comes out on New Jazz, the 8228, which is the 8200 series at New Jazz. And then, of course, they're sister labels, so there's not to be anything differentiated. This, of course, would be a Japanese pressing. This would be a North American pressing. Coltrane's great on this. McLean's great on this. But tuba, the ability of the tuba to play a lead and play a solo is really quite interesting. And he's a pretty dynamic player. And it's by no means an easy horn to play bebop and hard bop on. You know, the trombone is challenging. The tuba is next level. But he's actually quite dexterous and quite enunciated with the sound in his tone. And to be clear, these are both really hard records to find. Really hard records to find. He makes a third record on the Jubilee label. And I'm going to show that to you real quick. It's called the Tuba Jazz. And clever little wordplay. That's the lady there behind the tuba. And it's not really, it's more of a marching tuba, not really a jazz band tuba. And I think Coltrane's on this as well, if memory serves. And it doesn't say. But I'm pretty sure he has Coltrane's on this as well, which is kind of what dove me into Ray Draper and probably into the Jubilee label as well, which is what I'm going to talk about next, is Jubilee. However, I do want to mention this one record here. This Draper has a drug problem, as a lot of cats in this era did, and so he ends up spending quite a bit of time in prison. Most of the 60s, as a matter of fact, he spends locked up. And it's a tough thing for these young black men to go away for 7-8 years and come back and try to reestablish themselves. But here he is in 1968, and he does this record called Red Beans and Rice. And It's a crossover fusion funk jazz record, well ahead of Bitches Brew, which is often considered the first. And it's actually pretty good. And again, it's fairly accessible. You know, it's not that dense sludge of what Bitches Brew is. This is far more. Um, Again, it's R&B driven. You know, I think there's even vocals on most of it or some of it. Uh, it's got a nice pulse to it. But this is really what some people consider to be the first fusion jazz record. And I've never really sat back and analyzed that in depth. 68 is ahead of a lot of the electronic bass and electric piano stuff that was happening. There was other stuff that was kind of going on concurrently. But this is a really good record. Not that hard to find, not that expensive when you do find it. But I'll listen to this over Bitches Brew 5-1. I'll listen to this 5 times before I put on Bitches Brew. Maybe more. Bitches Brew's a tough listen for me nowadays. But there's some great instrumental passages on there, some straight soloing, but there's also some pretty straightforward R&B. And my wife washed my hair again today, so kind of enjoying that. So let's talk about the Jubilee label. And the Jubilee label was formed by Herb Abrams, who was partners initially with Ahmet Ertegun at Atlantic. And if memory serves on that, he was at Atlantic before Neshui Ertegun, Ahmet's brother. So it was Abramson and Ahmet Ertegun that had founded Atlantic. They liked R&B music, the beginnings of the black gospel fusion of jazz, rhythm and blues. They were kind of there for all that stuff, and they were fans of it. I remember they grew up in the D.C. area, maybe Baltimore, somewhere in that area, and they founded this label in New York, started Jubilee, kind of were looking for their path a little bit. There's a number of 10 inches, but not a lot, maybe 10 or 12. And then the LP era dawns in 55. And over the course of their run, there's a few distinct eras. The early era, they're kind of searching for artists, searching for a sound. There's a mix of kind of swing guys doing small group stuff, Dixieland, New Orleans sound guys doing stuff, the first piano trio stuff, some vocal stuff. The first 20, 30 pressings are a wide mix, not really a defined sound. And then they get into more of a really a hard bop sound, 57, 58. They do some really good stuff that's on par with what's happening in jazz all around the landscape. But they're also doing Della Reese and vocal stuff. And then they also, somewhere around 1060 or 70, start doing a lot of eye candy album covers with women that are quite collectible in their own right. And that's kind of a trend you'll see with Jubilee as they move later on in the sequence. First one I'm going to show you right now is number 1005, Gene Harris, the Gene Harris Trio. And this is Gene Harris of Blue Note 3 Sounds fame before that era. And great cover by Burt Goldblatt, beautiful color template there, nice fonts, beautiful stuff. 1955. Jubilee has a couple different logos. That's a beautiful old black pressing. Pretty sure that's a mono. I'm sure I'm positive it is. The number 1011 was Betty St. Clair. And this, I think, is from one of their 10 inches. And they put a couple other tracks on it to flesh it out. But Betty St. Clair is a great little singer. Memory serves, she's a white gal. This has a gold print on the black logo. But let's turn this funk off. And again, it's pretty straight ahead funk that Red Beans and Rice Band. And sadly, the Red Beans and Rice Band, by the way, he got back in heroin and the band kind of dissolves. And I think he might even end back in prison eventually. I can't remember for sure. But Ray Draper was kind of a sad story, but a great player that made some great stuff in the late 50s. And the stuff's worth collecting if you can come across it. This is basically, I'm pretty sure she's a white gal. And I guess, I know some of this from a 10 inch. Again, fantastic Burt Goldblatt. And you can see a Goldblatt cover when you see it. You know, a lot of those Bethlehems, a lot of those Storyvilles. These are probably even from the same day's photo shoot, I would guess. even though they're separated by only 1005, 1011, so not too super far. 1021 is a great record. Ethelana's Six Lullabies for Losers. I'm almost positive she's from Baltimore. And this has the original pink mono heavy gauge vinyl logo for Jubilee. They switched some of these pressings. Some of the covers get switched around to Jubilee. Some of the early gold blacks, they changed them to a cheaper cover. Maybe he had a marketing deal with them where they had to repay him every so often. I don't know. But they do change some of the covers to less attractive covers for some reason. But Atlantis is a great singer. And this had another title to it, another cover to it. Lullabies for Losers. There's another cover where she's kind of in this warehouse district, and she's on this kind of sidewalk, standing there in a jacket. But this is the first pressing. Again, a gold black cover. That's a great record. Black Lady really sings with a lot of soul. Number 1025 is Eddie Costa, Vinnie Burke trio. And if you don't know Eddie Costa, Vinnie Burke's a great bass player. He does some stuff at Bethlehem. He works with Chris Connor. Vinnie Burke's the real deal. But Eddie Costa is one of the most fantastic piano players you'll ever hear. And he's also a fantastic vibraphonist. He's just a fantastic, dynamic player. And in the 6 or 7 years he's on the jazz scene in the 50s, he's on over 100 records. And so before I really knew much about Eddie Costa, I kept seeing him pop up on great title after great title, both with black and white artists. And only the best really get to make that crossover consistently. And Costa is such a great player. And his record on Dot, the blue house, I can't remember, the House of Blue Lights, I think it's called. That record is so outstanding. On Dot, which is not really a great jazz label per se. But boy, that record floored me. I was expecting it to be just kind of medium tempo, pablum being on the Dot label, but Costa just shakes the timbers down. And he's known for rocking his left hand on the low registers, playing those lower octaves of the piano, and a very percussive and expressive and dynamic. And often he's playing his fills with his left hand, or has his right hand down here with his left hand. So he's using those lower and middle registers far more than the average piano player, who tends to be more tinkling up here on the ivories. Costa will give you that thunderous, and a piano that's really being rocked hard on those lower octaves can really add a lot of thunder to a trio. You can have just a wall of sound, and the piano is able to replicate the chordal arrangements of an orchestra when it's played in a certain way. And boy, Costa's such a talent. And he only makes 5 records, I think, as a leader, and 2 of those are co-leads, like this one with Vinnie Burke is. And the drummer on this is, see if I can. No luck, it doesn't say. I know who the drummer is, but I can't recall. I've known before. I can't think of it right now. It's probably someone like O.C. Johnson or something like that. But maybe it's I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, great record. Love Eddie Costa on all things I have him. And Mike Cuso is a fantastic sax player. He's a New Jersey guy. He has a record on Savoy as well. I think he leaves jazz and goes to be a real estate agent again, if my memory's serving me. But great cover. It's got a bit of a Pink Panther urban theme to it, with a cartoonish vibe to it. And I love this era of graphic design. And he's just a great, expressive, gutsy horn player. Scott Baldwin always talks about Mike Cuso as well. He's a fantastic, dynamic, a lot of Italian oomph. You know what I'm saying? You got to do that once in a while. Mo Kaufman is a Canadian. He's one of the first Canadians to ever make a record in the American jazz industry. Great little clarinet player. He also plays the alto sax, if I remember, and I think even the flute at times. Kaufman's a great little player. I think he's from Toronto, my hometown. And Kaufman was a legend in Canada a lot of his life. He's not too big a name down here in the States, but he does make 2 records here on Jubilee, and he shows up in other labels on United Artists. I think he's on some Concord stuff later on. So Kaufman's a great player, and it's a great cover as well. And you're already starting to see that inflection of the female form on the graphic design here. She's already helping sell that, slurping on that straw. I like a little straw slurpage. I'm okay with that. This is a great record. No fucking around with the cover here. It's just a beautiful dark design. Herb Geller, Fire in the West. And Herb Geller's a fantastic horn player. And it shows you Jubilee's getting some real talent. And for the most part, it's white talent, but they start delving more into black talent here in a minute. And Geller is just a fantastic player. His wife is also a fantastic pianist. And they make some records together at MRC in Chicago. Herb and his wife are just a great little pair. But Herb makes probably 3 records at MRC. He makes 2 here at Jubilee. And Herb is one of those players that just needs more recognition. If you like the Zutz Sims with a little bit more edge in that, even if you like Stan Getz, you know, he fits in that same mold as those cats from that era. Big fan of Herb Geller, and he's part of that whole West Coast scene for a long time. My most recent Jubilee find was this Gerard Blanet, and whether he's French or French Canadian, it's definitely a French name. Again, a great album cover. This is 1029, so even that early in the sequence, you're seeing kind of that femme fatale, cigarette smoking, beastly, kind of a dangerous woman vibe going on. This is 1040, Eileen Woods. And I've played this at a few of my DJ gigs over the years. It's what it looks like. It's light jazz by a white singer, but she's got a great voice. The band's fine behind her. Nothing miraculous or spectacular. At the same time, if you find this for $3 somewhere, the cover alone's fantastic. It's an old Jubilee label, and it's something you can play at a dinner party. I play it at weddings and events. I enjoy that record a great deal. Now, 1047, this is where they really start making some great stuff. This is Teddy Charles, the great vibraphonist who's from the Boston area. And Teddy Charles is a very inventive, expressive arranger and composer. Think Marty Peisch. He's in that same vein. Just real modern approach to arranging and composition. Here he's playing with a great bass player, Oscar Pettiford. And then Hal Overton's playing the drums. 3 for Duke. And the 3 of them play some Duke compositions, and they do it wonderfully. And so you see Jubilee starting to really give us some great jazz titles. This is Monica Lewis, and she also has a great early 10-inch on Jubilee, which I've not been able to track down because it's really rare and expensive. This was a reissue on the 12-inch series with some additional stuff, 1048. Again, I liked vocal gal jazz from the 50s, and I've said this before, but it's important to remember that if you want to know what vocal jazz you should look for stuff on the small labels, because they're more likely to be backed by a small jazz trio, maybe a quartet, versus some of the bigger labels. They're going to have bigger budgets and arrangements and big orchestras and maybe strings, and you get more of a oversight on those big labels. Whereas some of the same singers on the small labels make really great jazz vocal records that are just fun and accessible. And we all need that. We all need to bring our friends into jazz by playing accessible, fun stuff. This is a great record called Trio with Charlie Mingus, Hampton Hawes from the West Coast, and Danny Richmond. And Danny Richmond plays drums with Mingus for over a decade, and they were actually really good friends. And that's not something you say about Charlie Mingus very often. Most people couldn't wait to get away from the guy. But Danny Richmond and him had a real simpatico, and it seems that Mingus respected Danny Richmond a lot, and Richmond just had great, some personality just match. And there's a musical groove as well that worked between them. But it certainly feels like there was a real personal connection. And I'm not talking nothing sexual, just they were bros. You know, they got it. And Richmond's a few years younger than him, from what I understand. But, yeah, you say he sticks with Mingus through most of the 60s. And this is probably 59 here, 58 maybe. And Hampton Hawes is a great West Coast piano player. He was part of that LA scene. And, of course, Mingus is from LA, too. So you're getting some kind of edgier West Coast stuff. And I wouldn't even really call it West Coast necessarily. But this is Witchcraft. This is by Ray Martin and his orchestra. I just love this cover, all the colors of it. Again, 1958, number 1055. It shows you some of the graphic design that Jubilee was doing. the gal sitting there over kind of a flame of some kind. The music's kind of schmaltzy, which some Jubilee is, but schmaltzy has a place, and the covers are fun to collect, and the schmaltzy or Jubilee stuff is usually really inexpensive. Now here's a heavy hitter, 1059. This is probably the second or third Jubilee I'm like, I need to have that. Jackie McLean, the Ray Draper, this Jazz Lab stuff, the Teddy Charles, the Mingus. But this G.G. Grice Donald Byrd record, being a Blue Note guy is a big Donald Byrd guy. Byrd gets you kind of into Grice. They do that stuff together on Riverside. They do stuff together on Columbia. And you realize there's another one on Jubilee. Like, what's Jubilee? And so, again, it's one of my first Jubilees, number 1059. And this record's surprisingly affordable. You can usually find it for under $40. And a lot of Jubilee titles are much less than that. But Donald Byrd titles go for hundreds sometimes. So it's a great place to find and start with your Donald Byrd Jubilee collection. Randy Weston, another fantastic New York pianist. New York has this incredible collection of modern pianists. And really it starts with guys like Fats Waller, James P. Johnson, Willie Line Smith, moves into guys like Monk and Powell, and Herbie Nichols, Elmo Hope, Randy Weston. The list of New York pianists, it's immense. It's quite the thing. I've done an episode about it before, and I've discovered even more making the trading cards. There's a lot of guys that play piano in New York. It's called Piano a la Mode. I think he's playing by himself, if I remember. And he's got some balloons there up top. You can barely see them. Very pastel-y. Not the greatest cover. In fact, it's a pretty awful cover, if you ask me. The yellow with the lavender backdrop, nothing pops. Nothing really bad graphic design. This is the Jackie McLean Quintet. This is another one of those records that brings you to Jubilee. Great cover. Fantastic Jackie. At his young, kind of aggressive, still very much bebopping and hard bopping. Hasn't moved into any kind of that avant-garde stuff yet. Doug Watkins is on the bass. The great Doug Watkins, who died very young, but yet managed just like the piano player I was talking about earlier, whose name escapes me right now. He's over about 100 records, Doug Watkins, and he dies at 31 or something. So these guys worked hard. Mal Waldron's on the piano, another New York piano player, and Ronald Tucker's on the drums, who I don't know much about at all, but fantastic Jackie McLean. And Jackie's a bit of an acquired taste, I'll be honest, for some people. Joe Puma, big Joe Puma guy, one of the great guitar players of the 50s. He's on a lot of the side cat stuff, the New York hip and the West Coast cool. He'll show up on some of that stuff. Puma makes a couple records at Dawn. Like, his records are fantastic. If you get a chance to buy Joe Puma, and I just love 50s jazz guitar almost across the board. There's a Della Reese live at Mr. Kelly's in Chicago. Mr. Kelly's was a pretty famous club in Chicago, and Della Reese has probably 5 or 6 records in the Jubilee 1000 sequence. So she's one of the most popular artists at Jubilee at this point in time. A lot of these have the old wax paper sleeves on them still. It's pretty cool. This is the Shepherd Swings Again. This is Mo Kaufman, the Canadian clarinetist and flautist and alto sax player. And Mo Kaufman was a Jew, and they called him the Shepherd. And so this record's called The Shepherd Swings Again. It's pretty clever, pretty fun. Detour to the Moon, Marianne McCall. She's a nice little singer. You know, she's got a nice little style about her. Great lineup on this. They don't show it. There's a lot of great musicians on this record. The reissue I have on Fresh Sounds, and they get a list all the players, and it's a pretty impressive group of bats there. And most of the tracks on this record, if not all of them, reference lunar themes, thus Detour to the Moon. And there's a couple of tracks I'd like to play at my gigs quite a lot. The Moon Was Yellow is just fantastic and melancholy. I Wish on the Moon's kind of straightforward. Oh, You Crazy Moon's nice. Moonlight Becomes You, you know, melancholic, middle of the night kind of record. Jungle Fantastic by Bobby Montez is them diving into Latin stuff. Latin cha-cha-cha crossover jazz. Fantastic. It's fun. It's something I can play at my gig, kind of getting the vibe in the tempo, bringing it up a little bit. Lots of yellows and oranges in the template. And they do a lot of stuff like this. You know, again, the female theme, quite strongly stated. There's the Jazz Draper, Ray Draper record. We already talked about that. At Separate Tables by Luann Sims, another great vocal record. Nice, melancholic, cocktail kind of hour, vocal jazz. I've played this at my gigs for a long time. And Separate Tables, that track is really worth listening to. It's fun, and it'll kind of suck you in. Fat Jazz is Jackie McLean. It's a reissue of his earlier record on the small label that his first record's on. Can't think of it right now. I know this. Doesn't matter. This is a reissue of his first record on Jubilee, which had a better distribution. And this is a much easier way to find it than the original pressing. It'll cost you probably $500. Stacks of Sax is the second Herb Geller record on Jubilee. And just an outstanding player, like I said. I love Herb Geller. Cha Cha Jubilee is another one that was kind of Latin, fun. It's not as schmaltzy as some of the stuff you get like on the West Coast when you go to a label like Hi-Fi Jazz. That stuff's very saccharine. It's a little bit more authentic, a little bit more Latin flavor, a little more cilantro in the mix. You know what I'm saying? It's got some genuine feel to it. And I played a couple tracks on this on my gigs as well. 22 Del Rey Avenue, really fun. And it's a compilation. You got lots of different groups on here. Cy Oliver, Frank Ortega, The Accents, Mo Kaufman. So it's just Latin flavored stuff. And again, I've used that record numerous times. Wild, Wilder, and Wildest. Gretchen Weiler. She's being cheeky, no question about it. She's got some cheek to her, and those are highways that look like they'd be fun to drive. And the fun highways have hills and curves. We don't want that straight up and down road. We want some curves on our highways. And Gretchen Weiler supplies that. And this is fairly light fare. But again, Jubilee's trying to stay afloat, and different labels have different tacks, different approaches to try to keep the lights on. And this is with Jubilee. They were trying to put cute girls in the cover and get people to buy their stuff. Lou Levy, great West Coast pianist, plays with a lot of the great cool bop on the West Coast. Big fan of Lou Levy. Not related to Stan Levy. They're not even spelled the same. But they did have some crossover, those two guys on the West Coast. And Levy's a great little piano player who belongs in people's collections. Frank Ortega, again, kind of a Latin swing guy. Another cheeky cover on the Sunset Strip, I think it's called, with Cy Oliver, who's a great arranger and player. But this is Lou McGarity. If I remember, he's actually a trombone player. Doesn't say. They don't list the musicians very well in these records. Another cool cover. Another little Betty playing with instruments and the blocks of ice in the bathtub. Where's that going? And again, I'm just showing you this for the cover. Oh, you kid. Just a nice little attractive piece of work there. This is the era that it was in, you know. This is how they market it. These are madman agencies. And they're putting that sex out there. Genie in My Soul, Gene Harris Trio. I guess there's some controversy about this one. Gene Harris wasn't sure if this was actually something he licensed or okayed them to put out. My friend Jean-Michel said that he wasn't even sure if it was him. But my guess it is. It's probably just some outtakes that they patched together. This is number 1115. And it's pretty much the end of the Jubilee run right there. There's about 115 titles. Blow Man Blow is 1113. Jesse Powell. He's a great horn player. Really swings hard with a lot of R&B edges. Somewhere between Earl Bostic and Eddie Lockjaw Davis. I think he actually played with Basie for a little bit. So Powell's a great player. You can find this record out there for $5-10. So a lot of great stuff at Jubilee. It's a label that's often overlooked. A lot of people don't know about it. Got some pretty big names made stuff there. From Hampton Hawes to Charlie Mingus to McLean, Draper. You know, there's a lot of big names that show up here. Bird and Grice. And so it's a label worth collecting when you see them. The prices are usually very reasonable. And only there's a few in there that are going to fetch any kind of high money. And even those aren't going to be that big dollar amount like a Blue Note or a Prestige. So trust Jubilee, man. They don't really make bad music in this era. It's if you're a jazz label and you're trying to make stuff that's commercial, even that stuff has value because it's made well. It's produced well. It's recorded well. And by 58, 59, 60, 61, most of these record labels had pretty solid engineering departments. So it's not going to be like that earlier era where stuff's tough to define and hear. This stuff's all going to be very well produced and arranged and have a place in your collection. So Jubilee's fun. Ray Draper's great. That's today's episode. If you want to support the channel, please go to my Patreon and pledge a few dollars a month. It's always very appreciated. The trading cards, we're making progress. We're somewhere in the 150s now in terms of complete fronts and backs. So it's still got a long ways to go, unfortunately. But we're making, we're getting it done and learning as we go, boy. Every card I make, I come away from with a few more tidbits about that musician, a few more grains of knowledge. And you only have to have a few strands when you mention someone. You add a few bits of detail about them where it starts to build these memories, and the information starts to coalesce around these artists. The gravity of what you know about them, the more you know, the more this stuff sticks. And so I feel like these cards are kind of doubling my knowledge. Stuff I already knew, I'm being re-reminded. And then when you type or write something down, that only solidifies what you know and learn. And so it's been a real boon for me, just in terms of expanding my knowledge and solidifying what I do know already. And there's a lot of stuff I have to I know it, but I want to double check it. I'm like, make sure. And I've been right almost everything I remembered I wanted to type in there. Let me double check that. And pretty much I haven't really been too off on anything. Maybe you get a date wrong once in a while, but I'm pretty good with dates actually. So that chronology keeps cross-referencing itself. And the canon and the artists that make up that canon, these trading cards are really going to bring that all to life. And for me, I'm excited about it. And like I said, it's probably as hard as I've ever worked on any project. I've got probably hundreds of hours into it at this point. But it's hard work as its own reward. Sounds cliche, but it's true. I'm enjoying it, and I'm soaking it up, and it's making me an even better YouTuber because I know even more about all these guys, and not just the Miles and the Coltrane's, but there's the cross reference of the spider webbing. That's what gives the music its depth and its history and brings it to life. When you can reference where someone came from and who they worked with and who they influenced, it's all so interwoven the jazz kingdom, and that's the important aspect of it. Is none of it exists in a bubble. And it's not like rock bands where they were all unto themselves. This is very much a share and learn together kind of art form. And as it expands and moves around, it's pushing everybody's boundaries. And so, again, there's jazz that has value across the board for most of these labels in these years. So anyway, I'm done for today. Y'all be safe. Talk to you soon. There's some great merchandise in the store, in the description below. Check that out. Appreciate if you want to buy a t-shirt or a hoodie. That always helps out. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.